Thank you, Adele. And let me also acknowledge you, because some of us have worked with Adele, and as a younger woman, I was fortunate enough to bump into her at the Institute of Children's Health Research in Perth, which was led by Fiona Stanley, who became a very, very close colleague of all of us Aboriginal mob. And there were things we would say to people like Fiona, and I'm leading up to saying this thing about being a black and white issue is something we have to always keep in the back of our mind, that a lot of us Aboriginal people, as we encounter white fellas, say to them, you're a good friend, colleague, love you, but we don't have to necessarily agree with everything that they want us to do. And I think here today, we take this forward in a way which, in the first instance, is our way. I've always said to colleagues when I've been presenting, it's our right as Aboriginal people to control the pathways out of poverty. And that'll always be something I'll espouse, and I only see that if we don't get to control the pathways out of poverty, then we're going to linger in this chasm, in this abyss for a long, long time. And we need to somehow say to our Wodjila colleagues, and particularly those in senior government positions, and I know there's a couple of people here, I've already had a yarn with one of them, just to say to you, this issue is so important, and the numbers that have come to this conference tell us that we are concerned about the dying that is occurring in our world. It's too frequent, and one thing Adele and I were able to work on with Fiona was about life stress events that our kids see, and it's not fair. Our kids are seeing life stress events at a level which is quite outside of any sort of square that you might call a comfort zone. And our kids are seeing 20, some of our kids are seeing 15 life stress events per annum. And we're talking about the death of loved ones, the violence that might occur in a home, and and there are others too. There are car accidents, there are people who go to jail, there's the getting kicked out of your home because we haven't been able to pay the rent. And there are all these life stress events that occur in our kids, and that's not to mention some of the other nasty things which I've brought up before, which I won't mention today, but it is important that families do nurture our children, and the mental health, to stop the mental health problems and the stress that we're currently going through is not going to be a short-term fix. There are some things we can do in the short term, but there are some things we need to make sure we manifest through our cultural pathways over a generation or two. I know that there are other speakers here to speak, and I'll shut up now, and I'll wait for the proper discussion and the questions. But just to say, I do work in alcohol and drugs, and the connection of alcohol and drugs with mental health, the comorbidity, we know about it, and we have to somehow, with government, be able to channel down the resources and funds so that they come together. And I use the sharp end of the spear, okay? On the spear has to be the funding for alcohol and drugs and other things, but alcohol and drugs and mental health have to come out of this together. So Paddy, I've already had a yarn with Pat and Tom, and we probably need to just sit down together and have another yarn about how we might bring that forward with government. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ted. Firstly, I'd like to thank Tom Karma and Pat Dudgeon for creating a safe space within suicide prevention for an Aboriginal gay person like myself over the last few years. They've been really wonderful mentors, and there's been a few occasions where it's been tried and tested on how we should work as and work with us Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander LGBTI people, but they've been really wonderful in providing a safe space, and I feel very fortunate to be able to sit up here today and share some of the insights from the community that I belong to within our own community. I have a couple of points that I want to share with you as a person, not as a gay person and not as an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person, but just as a person with a lived experience of no different to a lot of other people, I guess I just want to say. And these points come from a place of wounds, challenges, successes, and also from living. The first one is, sport is not the panacea to preventing suicide. I had this conversation with my mother this morning again. We've been having this conversation for about 30 years. I've had this conversation with my two brothers who have both captained and coached NTFL teams in Darwin. I've had this conversation with a cousin who plays AFL. I've had this conversation with a former Wallaby player and also a former Olympian. Not every kid can play sport. Not every kid likes to play sport. We need to come up with more engaging ways and different ways to engage our young people. What I've seen over the last few years is that there's a lot of celebrities that are popping up in the suicide prevention space and the mental health space. Earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to be invited to speak at the West Australian Mental Health Conference. I met a gentleman from the UK there named Professor Mike Slade. And we had quite a number of conversations. He advises internationally for the World Health Organization and numerous other things throughout Europe. And one of the things that he said to me, which resonated with me because it's something that I believe, celebrities inspire greatness, they don't inspire wellness. Local homegrown heroes inspire that wellness. So that's where the investment needs to be. We get quite a few celebrities who it's fantastic that they're opening up about their mental health and their suicidality, but the space in which they get to open up is quite safe. For a lot of us that isn't, and a lot of other people that isn't. So in those places that aren't safe, where we can invest in those local people, we're going to be able to inspire those others around us. And it's that wellness that we need to inspire. You can inspire greatness in so many people, but we need to inspire the wellness. I think that really starts within the communities and the areas that we live in. Hope. We need to create more than hope. Hope doesn't build houses, it doesn't put food on the table, it doesn't create jobs, it doesn't get children to school. We need to create a future for our kids. We need to create possibilities. We need to create sustainable pathways. Question for you all. Hands up if you work for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisation. Keep your hand up if you have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander LGBTI reference group. It's time that you do. And it's great to see a few hands up. What we know from North America, our brothers and sisters, the First Nations people over there, and also in Aboriginal Canada, that if you're a First Nations person or an Indigenous person who identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender or intersex, you are the highest risk group for suicide than any other ethnicity in the country and in the world. That's why I'm going to the United Nations. 2 years ago I set that goal because we need to have a nudge. I feel very privileged and fortunate to speak here today at this panel. I hope in 2 years' time, whether it's the World Indigenous Conference or it's our second conference, that one of our mob is up the front here delivering a keynote to say that there has been some improvements in the way in which service delivery has been done. As I said in my presentation on the first day, I don't believe our communities to be innately homophobic, but we need to address heterosexism and let people be aware of how those microaggressions compound the other elements and of oppressions that we experience and the many veils of racism as well. Is Stan still here? No. Whoever knows him, can you please pass a message on to him? It's time for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander panel to be on live prime time TV to talk about these issues. We need to get this out amongst our people. Our visibility is very, very important. One of the recommendations that come out of the Roundtable report that the federal government has funded, part of this project, was around our communities not having an understanding of who we are. If we're not out there and able to have the access to that prime time, people aren't going to know who we are and how to better interact as an organisation, as a community or a service. And we have some really solid, deadly people out there who identify under that rainbow banner. They have some really awesome things to say and are worthy to have that exposure. Thank you very much. Manmak.
I better get it a bit closer, I'm not as big as... I'd just like to thank the organisers first for arranging this forum. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land for allowing us to meet here today. And I think it's a great gathering. And I didn't come up on stage to tell you that I have the answers, because that's why we're all here, searching for the answers to make sure that we can create a much safer community to protect our young ones from committing suicide. One of the things I'd just like to say, and I said to a young lad, well, he's not that young, but he spent the last 32 years in jail, and he's still in jail at this present moment, because he absolutely and categorically says that he's not guilty. So at this present moment, I'm working in Adelaide in the prison system, and with my sister down there, Heather Agus, who's with the Grannies group, and I think some of you most probably heard her speak today. She's a battler like myself and like many of us in this room. I go to her house maybe once, twice a week, just to sit down and find out how we can do things in South Australia. Because there's a great disconnect of our Aboriginal organisations there. They're working in the silo system and they're missing out on the opportunity to build a greater community for us in South Australia. I take notice of what's happening around Australia, and I'm quite overwhelmed. And I talk about it sometimes about what's happening in WA or Queensland or the Northern Territory, Victoria. I was really happy when I heard that Victoria was talking and going to have the discussion about treaty. And I'm a treaty man, I will not go anywhere else. But apart from that, ladies and gentlemen, we've established in South Australia called an Organisation of Miscarriage of Justice. And just to give you a little bit of clear understanding about one issue, our state coroner, or state pathologist as he was known, did an autopsy on an Aboriginal man in an Aboriginal community called Mintabee. And he did that autopsy out in the open, surrounded by many non-Aboriginal people looking at what he was doing while he was cutting up one of our countrymen. I'm at the present moment of trying to track down the family of that person. This is some 39 years ago. And I'll tell you how relevant it is, because the coroner of that, the coroner that done that to the Aboriginal man at Mintabee, was the coroner that gave evidence against this young Aboriginal man that's still in jail 32 years later. This young Aboriginal man was taken away from his family. And his father committed suicide. And his father is my mother's brother. So that's how close it is. And we're looking at all of the miscarriages of justice within South Australia because this coroner has done something like, or this pathologist has done something like 10,000 in South Australia. And many of those were people that have died in custody or people that have been put in custody because of this guy's information being provided. And his information was discredited by pathologists from around the world to say that he was not fit, but he still performed all of those. So that's just a little bit of the things that we're doing in there. But it also relates to many suicides, because this young man has been strong enough not to commit suicide. And like I said about the Grannies group, my friend and sister girl tried very hard. The unfortunate thing about it is state and federal government don't show what we do in our community and don't support, and on more times than once, just cancel the funds. So, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here, because I said to this young lad in jail, well, he's not that young lad now, I said to him, I will mention this in Alice Springs so people know what we're up against. Thank you.
Ngari. Ngari, I'd just like to pay my respects to the Aranda people on this land that we're meeting today. Ngayon kijaban nga, kawan di jarak nganan nga. Manam bro, wanyagam puro yuriang. What I said in my language is, today we're meeting to talk about our young people and how we can make things better for them. I come from, I guess, a very old traditional background where I was raised by my grandparents. The country that we come from is Mullabula. I mean, Mullabula has had a huge history in regards to the people, as they call the stolen generation, that were brought into Mullabula. So there was a lot of them there. But my family actually comes from there. So while they were looking after kids up in the better part of Mullabula, we were still in the bush. So I had a lot of understanding and upbringing in my culture. We've seen a lot of the way that our lives or our people's lives were affected because of that integration. But that didn't stop me from, having, I guess, an angry feel to how and why we were deprived of a lot of things. So, as anyone else that come from, that sort of background, we sat and we listened to what was happening. We went along with the flow, how they moved us from here to there. As kids, they put us in the back of a truck and sent us down to Fitzroy Crossing. And I was one of the kids who was on this truck, open back truck, that took us from Halls Creek to Fitzroy. There was nothing in Fitzroy really at that time, but the mission took care of us, and we were told we weren't allowed to practice our culture, which meant that we weren't allowed to speak any language at all. So we had to learn to read the Bible from the book of from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelations at the back. And a lot of us children recited some of those books chapter by chapter, so we knew it. We knew every part of the Bible that was. The mission gave us English, so that was one good benefit about growing up in the mission. And I must thank, the teachers who taught us English. I came back from there. There was about 6 of us girls who tried to run away from Fitzroy Crossing, and like I spoke to one of my fellow colleagues from our Member of Parliament in West Australia, and I told the story about how we tried to swim the mighty Fitzroy River when it was in full flood, and we never got anywhere. We ended up in the trees with all these snakes and anything that was on the trees. But that sort of made me think about where we were heading. Later on, as I grew up, I married a man by the name of Bill Farrer. He was from the Northern Territory. That's how I got my name, Farrer. Bill and I had 4 children, and then he passed on, and I was left to look after these 4 kids. During that time, I met Mario. Now, his family comes from, we heard about stories about Poland, and that's where Mario's family comes from. So in their lifetime, I guess they were faced with the same sort of tragedy that we as Aboriginal people have experienced. Mario is a good man. He helped me raise my 4 children, and we had 5 children together after that. But I also ended up looking after my sister's 4 children. My sister died of alcohol poisoning. So we had 13 children, plus, it's not stated here, but plus I ended up with 2 white kids. So there was a whole mixture and combination of our Indigenous culture as well as Western culture that was brought in. And I think that was really good for me. It taught me a little bit about politics. When we weren't able to get back onto our country, I decided to work with some of the older people. So thus we set up the Kimberley Language Resource Centre, which worked with most of the languages in the Kimberley. And then I was on the Kimberley Land Council as a director. So all that I learned from my children taught me about what each child was like, what their personality was, and how I could deal with them. Having gone through that role and working in those different areas, I decided to run for the local council, which I was successful in doing so. And I spent 16 years with the Shire of Halls Creek, so I understood a little bit more about how government works. Out of 16 years, I spent 7 years as the Shire President. So that gave me an ability to have an insight into how government does work. During my time as the Shire President, I experienced a tragedy with one of my grandchildren. He was only a young fellow. He was the oldest boy of my eldest son, and he committed suicide, which really rocked us. It really cut the family up, but also I just walked away from what I was doing. His death took away 8 years of my life. 8 years which I dedicated to the mourning of losing a loved one. I didn't have any counselling. We didn't have counselling. Any of the family members didn't have counselling. Even his dad didn't have counselling. But I went and I rolled my swag and got my dog together and went out in my old Toyota and went out bush and camped out there. For the first few weeks, I was on my own out there, which was really a healing thing for me, because in our culture, in Aboriginal culture, we have a very spiritual culture. So I was able to communicate through that world with the spirits of my ancestors and people. It gave me an insight and a healing, and it helped me to be calm. Later on, other members of my family came to join. It was during that time that I really thought about what sort of life our young people were heading into. When we were growing up, we didn't have alcohol, and there was no ganja around, certainly. But on the stations, they had Sunlight Tobacco and Havelock, tobacco. So they were the only sort of, I guess, drugs that when we were growing up that was around. Mind you, we tried chewing those things. But, you know, today I listen to a lot of things that go on, and people, we blame alcohol and we blame ganja. But there's a lot more to how our young people see life. Dispossession of where they come from, who they are, and their own identity is a big and a very strong, vital part of our lives. And we need to educate our children on that. With that in place, I thought about how I could maybe make it better for some of our young people. So in 2013, I nominated to become a candidate for the Labour Party, and I ran for it. I was successful and I got in. Here I was thrown right into politics, and this is the politics that sometimes we, as people, whether you're black, whether you're white, you see there's a big difference. You don't know how to do things, but you learn. So it was a very strong and moving experience for me. I was very lucky in a sense that I had fellow members of Parliament who were able to talk and work with me. So, I'll listen to you. So, they were some of the big steps that I had to overcome. But my maiden speech was based on suicide because of the pain that we felt as a family. Since then, I must say that I've raised the issue about suicide and the number of suicides in the Kimberley, and we've been very fortunate that fellow members of our Parliament in Western Australia have taken and considered that as something that we should be doing to support and try and work with our people. There's been a select committee that was set up in 2008 that I didn't know of, but when I came in 2013, I talked about suicide. And I guess the brunt of it all was when we lost a little 10-year-old girl at Luma community, and that was very hard for a lot of us to digest in a sense. And I talked about this in Parliament, asking for a parliamentary inquiry into suicide. I was informed later that there had been a committee that was already set up. I had not known about. But since then, I've been co-opted onto that committee, and two of my members are here today that sits on that committee, and we are more than willing as a Parliament to work together to try and look at ways and solutions. I guess that's all I can say, and I'm very grateful in regards to my fellow MPs that have come here to Alice Springs, and we've all supported each other. Thank you. Jeriam.
Well, Wadamuli everyone. I've had the floor a bit today, so Madam Chair, I'll try and be very quick. I'd again like to thank the traditional owners for allowing us all to be here, and in particular me, and the organising committee. I want to thank you sincerely for not only giving me an opportunity to be here, to be on the panel, and I too got a lot of healing here today in some of those workshops from friends and family. We've been coming to conferences for a long time, and my history goes way back here. As my boss is here somewhere, Neville Perkins. Where is that man? Is he still here? Yeah, he's still here. Or is he gone? Raise your hand, Neville. When I was I got a job with Aboriginal Hostels, but when I first arrived here, I didn't have anywhere to stay. And I came from Townsville, as everyone knows. My dad was sent to the mission of Palm Island, the infamous Palm Island, where that horrendous death in custody was. I, of course, was going to save the world when I was 13. And did a lot of hardcore thinking, and I interviewed a lot of our elders, and I was very traumatised. So I remember an aunt of mine that they'd brought up from one of the other missions, and I must have been about 7, and I was always very inquisitive. I'm one of 19 children and third eldest, and I wanted to bathe my auntie's feet and hands because she had like keloid scarring all over her body. And I thought, and it looked very unattractive, but I used to always cuddle her. And when I was bathing her hand, one of her fingers fell off, and I almost died. But she didn't have any pain. It was called leprosy. And she was on her way to Townsville. She came up with one of the government officials. Now, I'm 65, so this is quite a while ago. And she was getting sent to Phantom Island, which was a leprosarium outside of Palm Island, and which was a lot of our people that contracted Yours or Hansen's disease. So I was fortunate to be able to, I suppose, interview a lot of our people and had a lot of their stories from way back. My mum always said that I was going to get myself into a lot of trouble because I was always asking questions. So I thank Tom for allowing me to come here, because Tom knows me from my old days, jumping Parliament House, and I'm actually sitting in Parliament House now and negotiating with when are these strategic plans going to give us KPIs that suit the community, that are achievable and sustainable. And I think today has been a movement that this conference that's talking about solutions. We don't have the solutions, but if we have a look back at history, the National Aboriginal Health Strategy, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, the National Aboriginal Education Policy, the Bringing Them Home report, and all of those social justice documents, they're all saying the same thing, my brothers and sisters. They're talking about the impact of colonisation. They're talking about unresolved grief, loss and trauma. And when a little girl or a little boy has been removed from their family and sent to the mission or sent to a home, and they're beaten constantly, sexually abused, waken up to a bowel, how do they become good mothers when they've had no culturally appropriate healing? And so when someone said to me, what are you going to be when you grow up? I said, I'm going to be an activist, and I'm going to be a health professional, and I'm going to be the Prime Minister of this country. So when I did my travelling around the world, in particular when I went to Canada and America back in the 70s, don't forget we were under the Flora and Fauna Act, so very few of us had passports in the 70s. And I did my nursing training from 1967, which just blew my mind when I talked to Brother Stan this morning about that constitution, where we were from the Flora and Fauna Act and got on the constitution. A bit confused about the R campaign, but we all don't agree. As long as we all want self-determination for our children, and as long as we want to stop all this abuse in our communities, in particular suicide. So when I had a look at all these other places and worked on them, I was very impressed with treaties. I was very impressed working in Aotearoa as a midwife. But before I actually took to the hospital on a scholarship, I had to live on a marae. I saw all these Maori people under an affirmative action strategy where they had seats in Parliament. And that's what we should start having. I'm not sure if you could have that under the Constitution, but I'm pretty sure that we're on a road to change, that we do have to have affirmative action, because we're in the minority, and I think that's a solution if we have set seats in Parliament for our mob. And because you get so proud when you see one of our mob in Parliament, eh? And they say, oh, what are they going to do? I said, we got to be everywhere. We got to be in the media, we got to be in government. I too was a public servant when the Goss government went into power. I thought, living under Bjelke Petersen, we all dead. And then I decided then to go to Western Australia to work, and then Charlie Court I thought was his twin brother. And then confronting Lang Hancock, who wanted to poison the waterholes of us half-caste women, I thought, Jesus, this is, everywhere I go it's bad. But I guess after 50 years of writing a daily diary, I believe that we're on some form of road to recovery of healing from our cultural terms of reference. I've got some deadly white friends in this audience, but when they start sticking up for us, they don't get a job. So what I wanted to close with, and you've got to read my book, suicide. I got very involved in HIV/AIDS because I noted a lot of our brothers were cupboard gays, countrymen belonged to me, and they were going to Sydney or way down south to hide their identity and hide their sexuality. And I was just horrified that our people were going away because you couldn't come out of the closet and be gay. Not just the brothers, some of the sisters. But when HIV hit the world, the government decided to do a mass screening on Palm Island. And out of that mass screening, Palm Island is a community no different to any others. 95% of the community are on the welfare, 200% of markup of food, 20 to 30 people living in a house. Most of the jobs, the CDP's finished now, so most of the jobs go to outside contractors. I'm dead against too much of our money going into research, and I'm a researcher, because we know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are. We start dealing with poverty, we start dealing with culturally appropriate programs, and the other thing we've got to start dealing with is bloody compensation. Don't give our people $7,000 for all the trauma they've been to, and non-Indigenous peoples, they're talking about giving them $1 million compensation per person because they went to rich white schools. And so we have to have a look at that Closing the Gap campaign, and I heard my brother Jimmy Morrison there saying, did you know all this money went to non-Indigenous peoples? And we've got people like in Parliament that are pushing for us. I've got to finish soon. I haven't even started my presentation. It's going to take 1 minute. So, had a lot of our one of our young brothers who was telling everyone he was straight, he was 16 years of age. So you can imagine all the dysfunction on our communities. And he was called into the hospital and told he had a disease called AIDS. He said, what's that? They started explaining to this brother. But there was no follow-up like the conference had here today with counsellors, you know. And then he started drinking a lot of alcohol, punched the policeman, he went to jail. He went to juvenile detention, and when he turned 17, he went to the big house. He actually committed suicide in the jail. And I guess my life then started on working on HIV/AIDS. Then we started a community control. Oh, by the way, 42 years ago, I was marching in the street for community control TARS, the Community Control Health Service in Townsville, and had many discussions with this young man here, Warren Snowden, when I come to work at Hetty Perkins, and said, I'm going to fight this Pine Gap and we're going to save the world. But in saying all of that, we then, after the medical community control was established, and I'm all 200% behind community control, because a lot of our people going into the hospitals were being misdiagnosed, mistreated and locked away. I'm so in favour of justice reinvestment. I'm in favour of all those documents being implemented, and if they stop putting too much money to the greedy and give to the needy, we won't have to meet every 2 years like this. And so this mental health community control service we did was an offshoot of TARS. We had a 24-hour service, and after 5, we had a lot of volunteers, black and white. They had to go through my screening process. They didn't have to have masters or PhDs or even degrees. Some of them couldn't speak English. They had to be culturally competent and understand what poverty was about. 2 minutes left. So we were getting KPIs. that met the needs of the people. I guess I've got to finish now, but just in closing, my PhD, and I'm not on about PhDs because when I'm in Townsville, my big boss doesn't have a PhD, and that's my eldest sister. We have one boss. She's the matriarch. So when I finish at universities being the deadly academic, I'm told after 5 when I go home, know your place. And so I do, because we've been privileged to be brought up with culture, law and politics. But I want all social services, black and white. I don't care if you work for the government, work for community control. You have to start working from 5 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 in the morning. And I was very sarcastic. And government's starting to listen. I said, I'm putting out a strategic plan for our young kids not to self-harm between 5 o'clock in the afternoon and 8 o'clock in the morning because the services are all shut. And so we have to start rethinking how we deliver the services from a bottoms-up approach. They've got to be culturally appropriate. I'm not doing the black and white thing because some of our own mob are not culturally appropriate. I got some white brothers and sisters that are more culturally appropriate. So they've all got to get the healing journey. So I decided to write a PhD and graduated 5 years ago, and I talked about the dream time of 60,000 years where we had cultural LORE intact, and then I called the last 230 years a nightmare, deaths in custody, all of this stuff. And I was just so taken back by the death in custody on Palm Island with Brother Marunji, as you all know, and the bullyman on an all-white jury got off, and that same bullyman is still getting away with a lot of business. And so what I want to do, and again, thank you, if they implemented everything, we wouldn't have to meet, and I hope the government will continue to sponsor these conferences because we're all getting healing together. But I want to close up, and I said it in the workshop, I want to do a story on Indigenous mental health versus Western, and I said it in the workshop, without disrespecting anyone's religion. I want to start it off by saying in the Western world of 2,000 years, when they speak to their God, it's called praying. But when their God speaks back to them, it's called schizophrenia, culturally inappropriate, and they can lock you away. In my Indigenous world of over 60,000 years, when I speak to my ancestors and Creator, and they speak back to me, it's regarded as culturally appropriate and normal behaviour. Thank you, and Watamuli. Right, thank you.
Can people hear me? People hear me? Start with acknowledgement. Yamaginda Gumoroi Wanangulda, Diriamandu, Aranda, Bayami Wajalwin, Ganjil. To the Māori who have come from overseas, Haere mai, tēnā koutou, whenua, aroa, aroa. I'm just going to do a quick brief of what I just heard. Uncle Ted Wills, it's time for Aboriginal governance. We need to manifest something from here today that is real. It is time. One of the solutions he put forward was this funding in regards to alcohol and drugs as a recommendation. Brother Boy, Damien, engaging ways for young people. Homegrown heroes bring wellness. Homegrown heroes bring wellness. It's time. And visibility. I really hope we don't send our gay, lesbian, transgender community down the same path that we've been for the last 30 years, brother, because I'm hearing the same things over and over again for the last 30, 40 years. The only difference with this conference was that your mob were being acknowledged. So I hope your mob's not sitting with our mob in 40 years' time just doing the same discussion over and over again. I really do. Toro, who is my skin father, because we are living, breathing, practicing culture. Safer communities, we need to protect our young ones. We are working in silos and we are overwhelmed. And what is overwhelming us is a miscarriage of justice. We then heard of a very personal story of an autopsy that just shows what happens when people who are not culturally sensitive intervene in our affairs. Then, one of the most amazing Aboriginal women in this country talked about integration and how it affected our lives. Lost language, being moved around, how the mission gave her English, forced to read the Bible. These are stories that are in our lifetime. We're all up here at the panel today. This is not about the history. This is not about Australia's racist history. This is about its present. As I keep saying, we're meeting in Alice Springs where they practice apartheid. Our children teach us diversity. And through her children she gained strength. But then like Toro, there was a crisis through suicide. That created isolation, but that isolation became healing through Aboriginal spirituality. Do you understand? Healing through Aboriginal spirituality. The alcohol, the ganja is not a problem. It's the result of the many problems that we face. Take away the alcohol and the ganja with your basics card, you do not fix the problems. And those problems come down to dispossession, and we're all here today because of the loss of a 10-year-old girl. Please let that not be in vain. Then my beautiful auntie, Gracelyn Smallwood. You know about pay it back? You know how old people are meant to mentor young people? I was having a breakdown just over 12 months ago. I told my PFC that if he tried to sack me, I would bring 10,000 blackfellas to Griffith University and we're going to smash the fucking windows. I was part of a group that got 20,000 people into Melbourne and shut the fucking city down. So he took me seriously. Auntie Gracelyn flew down from Townsville and met with my Pro-Vice-Chancellor. I was given a 12-month sabbatical to tour Aboriginal communities around the world because of this amazing woman next to me. In the 12 months that I was away, I wrote a book. Again, through Auntie Gracelyn, I've just received my first advance, and it's going to be published through Routledge about that year I took away. That's what our old people should be doing, not taking away the ganja, judging and intervention on those who need to self-medicate because there's no support services when that's all they have. We heard about the impact of colonisation, transgenerational trauma without cultural healing. We heard the need for seats in Parliament, affirmative action, no more money on research, because we know the solutions. We've been sitting here, as I said, for 40 years discussing the same situation over and over again. The need for autonomy, the need for self-governance, the need for Aboriginal people to make decisions about Aboriginal people. And finally, we need to rethink the way we do things. That it must be culturally intact. And if they just simply implemented everything that we're asking, we would no longer have to meet and we wouldn't have a suicide problem. So this is what I'm proposing. It's time. We go back to government from this and we say that there is no, or has there ever been, any Aboriginal advisory body in this country with any mechanism of governance that comes from our grassroots community. Yes. We are going to take nominations from this conference. You know how we're going to get through that middle managed public service academic? We're going to ask for language speakers, people who know their ceremony, their dream, their song lines. Because there's only 12% of our people who still speak their language today. If we're going to survive the oldest living culture in the world, we need people who understand it. I'm sorry, but we're here in a crisis. And if we lose our language and we lose our ceremony, we have no foundation. I'm proposing that we nominate from the floor language speakers, ceremonial people, people who understand their dreaming, who know that they would get nomination from country, not state representation, songlines, dreaming paths. Because if we continue to do what we do and we put faith in government mechanisms outside of our own Aboriginal governance, which has been around for tens and thousands of years, we'll just be here in another 30 years' time. The difference is we'll have less language speakers, less ceremonial people. It's time. It's time. Gabiinda, thank you.